We hope you have a good day. The first thing for me to do is to thank our global partners, without whom none of this kind of stuff would happen. And as farriers, we need to, in the industry today, we need to remember that most of the CPD events, whatever they are funded by our suppliers. Okay, so I'd like you to make sure, well, in fact, we've made sure, because lunch is served inside the market tent, but make sure that you visit them and go and personally thank them for their support, because you wouldn't have it without them. Okay? Which brings me to CPD. It is compulsory, as you know, but it's up to you guys to make sure that what you do from that point of view is worthwhile. There's a clamour to run around collecting points, and I understand that, but try and make sure that what you do is worthwhile and broaden your mind and your scope a little bit. And that's what we've tried to do in the selection of our global partners. You'll notice that, for example, we have some people here from the Hoof boot shop. And whether we like it or not, barefoot trimming is here to stay. So what better income stream than you taking advantage of that with the knowledge that you have, and who better to size up and fit hoof boots for these people that want to go, quote, barefoot, unquote, but need a pair of boots, unquote. In my language, that's called a pair of shoes, but never mind. But so use what's going on and the skills and the knowledge that you have to change the way in which you do business. Some of our partners, obviously the Shoeing Lab, Richard Ash and Blacksmith Italia, Nick from Third Millennium, Carl from Stromsholm. We've got a lady here from Equigate, which is a phone app for record keeping, and we've also got her and a solicitor to speak to you about the necessity for record keeping and the avoidance of litigation. I sit before you, having been done by the FRC for various scenarios activities, and I can tell you that their actions in prosecuting what they call professional misconduct are vociferous. You need to start keeping records to avoid them and avoid the current culture of where there's blame, there's a claim. Yeah, simple. So talk to them, talk to the solicitor that's here if you've got any questions. She's a litigation solicitor. They'll be available in the stand there. We've also got Total Foot Protection, who for years have been bringing in innovative kind of products. And then some other ones, Equistride, and you'll see Equistride is a tendon rehabilitation device, and you'll see the benefit of its application on one of the cases that we're going to present. John Parker International Horse Transport, and so on and so forth. I hope I haven't missed anybody out, but without all of them, this would not happen. The format for today is we're going to run through some anatomy, some functional anatomy, and some planes of reference, just to refresh your memory, because I know it's a long time since any of you went to school. And then we're going to be presenting you through the course of the day with two individual cases, one of which is a hoof morphology case that has had numerous setups and packages on it to no real avail over several years, and you'll see the variation of those packages and the improvements that we've had, and then the decline, and so on and so forth. And the reason that we're presenting that is because I want to be able to illustrate to you that, A, not everything suits not one package suits every horse, but B, not the same package doesn't suit the same horse all of the time. And that you have to adapt and adjust what you're doing following your assessment of each individual. I personally work on a policy, if something's not going right within 3 shoeing cycles, then I really seriously need to be having a rethink about what's going on. And then the second case is us dealing with the aftermath of what was a fairly catastrophic injury. And we present that to you to try and illustrate to you the necessity for working with other professionals, and in particular working with the owner. This particular horse is extremely fortunate that the owner is not only dedicated to her animals, but is OCD about what she does with them. And but for that, and her persistence in ensuring that she got accurate and timely interventions, this horse would be feeding somebody's spaniel by now. Which brings me to the last point. I'd like to thank Steph Hirschfield, who is the owner of this place, who has graciously allowed us to use it and provide all these facilities. She's put her heart and soul into making this as good as possible for you and make sure that everything is in order in her normal OCD way. She gets on the phone to me 3-4 times a day, reminding me of stuff that I've forgotten, recognizing the fact that I've had Alzheimer's for several years. So, without me rattling on, we'll move along very quickly now, and Neil and Paul will present you skeletal and surface and functional anatomy over the next couple of sessions. Last thing, this is an interactive clinic. Please don't sit there pondering a question that you might ask at 7 o'clock tonight on the way back down or back up the M6. If you have a question, apart from Dorian, raise your hand and we'll get straight to you. If you have an opinion, raise your hand and get straight to you. We're here not to teach you, but to learn from each other and learn from each other's experiences. I am not suggesting to you for 1 minute that the stuff that we present to you is right. But what I will do is tell you what we've done with these cases, why we did it, and what we feel didn't work at the time and why we changed it. And it doesn't mean to say that I think that we've got it right. Okay? So be as interactive as you want to be. But don't be ringing me up tomorrow and go, I meant to ask you, but what about so-and-so? Because I'll be in the pub. All right, Paul, Neil, thanks very much. Have a great day. Don't forget to interact with the trade stands at lunchtime. Oh, tea, coffee, all that stuff is on the go. We're not stopping for coffee breaks and all that stuff. It's just on the go. So just, you want one, get up, help yourself. There's soft drinks, tea, coffee, whatever. Away you go. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah? You on, Neil? Right, welcome to the first bit that me and Neil are going to do. The first thing I want to talk to you about a few things. First of all is confirmation and assessing confirmation, and the importance of assessing confirmation. Without going into individual specifics, it's something that we should all do in our everyday work. When formulating a shoeing plan is assessing the individual horse's conformation. So we all know the basics. When assessing conformation, we need to assess the horse from the front, from the side, and from the rear. Now, as humans, we are hardwired to appreciate symmetry, to appreciate balance. It's not something that we need to work particularly hard at. What we are good at the moment we see it is a lack of symmetry, a lack of balance, a lack of proportion in the animal. We see enough horses in our day-to-day life to appreciate symmetry and also to appreciate conformation. And then within that bracket, we have the different types of horses. So, obviously, this is an Andalusian. The sort of warm bloods are shaped a certain way. The hot bloods are shaped a certain way. The native breeds are shaped a certain way. So, it's really just appreciating it. So, for example, some basic things. If you take the body of the horse out, it requires some imagination. Take the body of the horse out, it should fit in the gap underneath without any gaps either side. Another thing to look at is the head and the neck. If we appreciate horses, if you go into an 18th century Victorian manor and you look on the walls and you look at the paintings of horses, assuming they were painted lifelike, you'll notice they have very long necks, very small heads. Nowadays, horses have very short necks and very large heads. So man is very good at playing around with animals. The horses that we get now, arguably, they're too short in the neck. But the actual body, so if we take the body out, it should fit underneath. If it doesn't, then it's going to be short-legged or long-legged. Have a look at the neck and the head in proportion to its body and its hindquarters. So as we stand at the side, kind of divide the horse into segments and have a look. We've all had horses on our round, hopefully, where you do an intervention, the horse has a problem, we intervene, we fix it, it gets better, it gets better, it gets better, and then suddenly you're back to square one again. I would argue that those type of horses, the conformation is out. And kind of no matter what you do, you can improve them a little bit, but you kind of always end up in the same place. Are those horses fixable? Are they not fixable? The fundamental problem is lack of proportion. Things are out of balance. And Mark's going to talk about that today with the horses that we're going to shoe. Okay, so again, part of your everyday life, part of your everyday shoeing, and to be fair, you will do it automatically, is just have a look at the horse's conformation, depending on what breed and what type it is. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, and again, is to prepare for today, is I want to talk about planes of reference and the importance of understanding planes of reference. And again, from a professionalism point of view, when dealing with vets and paraprofessionals, we use this language of directional and positional terms. And I would encourage you all to continue to use it and understand it more than anything else. So if the vet is talking about the transverse plane, the frontal plane, the sagittal plane, we should, as professional farriers, understand exactly what the vet is talking about. A few things about planes of reference. Obviously, the horse is a quadruped. It is down on all fours. So I'll use the first plane I'm going to talk about, which is the transverse plane. So the transverse plane of the body is in this direction, and the transverse plane of the leg is in this direction. So straight away we think, well, they're not even on the same plane, yet it's the same word. What we need to imagine with all mammals, really, is the horse stood up with its front legs in the air, okay? And then if we think about planes of reference, this is the transverse, sorry, good TV. This is the transverse plane, this is the transverse plane, like that. But when you stand the horse up, they are the same plane, okay? So depending on where the vet is talking about will depend on which plane it is. So when it comes to legs, if the vet is talking on the transverse plane, then it is on this plane here. The next plane we're going to talk about is the frontal plane. Now the frontal plane on the horse through the body travels horizontally, divides the horse top half, bottom half. The frontal plane of the leg divides the leg, again, caudal, cranial. So frontal plane, if I go around this way. And again, if you imagine the horse stood up, they are the same plane. The horse stood down, stood up, so they are the same plane. Same with transverse, they are the same plane when the horse goes up. The next plane I want to talk about is the median plane. Now the median plane runs down through the horse's ears, down through the spine, and divides the horse into two equal halves. There is no median plane of the leg, it becomes the sagittal plane. And the sagittal plane are all the planes off the median. There's one median plane, divides it into 2 equal halves. Everything off that then becomes sagittal. So when we get to the leg, and we're talking sagittally, if you remember back to your college days, draw a sagittal section, draw a transverse section. And again, hopefully, you're going to go on and do different qualifications. It doesn't really matter what they are. We have to be good at planes of reference. So again, on an exam, you may get draw a sagittal plane, draw a transverse plane. If you don't know what these planes are, then you have no way at all of being able to draw them. So the sagittal plane essentially divides the leg into 2 equal halves, and it is always parallel to the median plane. So they're the planes of reference, and as the name suggests, planes of reference, they allow us to describe various parts of the horse. And today, when we go through the shoeing, we will be talking about and using different planes of reference. The last bit I'm going to talk about before we move on is directional terms. So these are terms that we use to describe the direction something is running in. So the first 2 are probably the most well-known 2. The first 2 we're going to deal with is proximal and distal. Now, proximal does not mean up, all right? Proximal means towards the body. So if something is traveling towards the body, it is traveling proximally. And I say that, again, if we imagine the horse down, if proximal means up, yes, but when you stand the horse up, suddenly proximal doesn't mean up, proximal means down. However, if we use towards the body, whether the horse is down or whether the horse is up, it is traveling towards the body. Distal, away from the body. So if something is traveling in a distal direction, it is traveling away from the body. We've got dorsal. Dorsal means on or situated towards the spine. So, for example, the front of the forelimb is dorsal. And again, if we imagine the horse standing up, dorsal, it is on or situated towards the spine. Ventral, on or situated towards the belly. So anything running towards the belly, on the belly side, is ventral. Okay, brings me to a good point. When you went to college, as apprentices, you're taught that this is dorsal. Yeah, or not, this is dorsal. We actually, if we think about it, the horse is up, it's on or situated towards the belly. Why the front of the hind leg is called dorsal, I do not know. It should be ventral in my eyes. Okay, but on or situated towards the spine, dorsal, ventral. We've got medial and lateral, on or situated towards the inside, on or situated towards the outside. We have terms like axial and abaxial. Axial, if we imagine the leg, we'll stick with the leg as farriers. We divide the leg into half. We've got the midline that runs down the center of the leg. Anything that is traveling axially is traveling towards the midline. Anything that is traveling abaxially is traveling away from the midline. So there are plenty others that we could go on for another 20 minutes or so talking about planes of reference and directional terms, but they're the main ones that we use, and hopefully they're words that you all recognize. Do you truly understand what those words are? It can be confusing sometimes speaking to a vet on the phone and the vet is using this terminology. You think, you like that? Well, it's running that way. Again, just spend a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with the planes of reference. Mark mentioned functional anatomy before. Studying anatomy is one thing. Being able to remember the names of things is one thing. To truly be good at anatomy, you have to understand functional anatomy, which means how does one thing interact with another thing? Why is that the way it is? Not just what it's called, but why is it the way it is? Okay, and when you start to appreciate functional anatomy, you'll find things make a lot more sense. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, again, as a form of, a bit of a recap, is we're going to go through and have a quick talk through the skeleton, paying particular attention to the legs. All right, so the horse is divided into, its skeleton is divided essentially into 2. We have the axial skeleton and we have the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton is the head, the spine, and the ribs, so the main trunk of the horse with the legs removed. That is known as the axial skeleton. Attached to the axial skeleton is the appendicular skeleton. And the appendicular skeleton essentially is the legs. And the appendicular skeleton is divided into the thoracic, or the fore, and the pelvic and hind limb. Okay, so if we start with the thoracic limb is not attached to the skeleton at all. The horse does not have a collarbone. It's held, the thoracic sling, essentially big muscles that hold this thing in place. It's what allows the horse to pick its front feet right up. If it had a collarbone, it wouldn't have that range of movement. And the most proximal bone of the thoracic limb is the scapula. The scapula is a flat bone, has a piece of cartilage that extends this dorsal edge up to around about the point of the withers. Flat bones serve two purposes. One is protection, so the skull would be a good example of a flat bone. The other type of flat bone that you see is a bone that's expanded into a broad surface area for the attachment of essentially major muscles, which Neil's going to talk about soon. The scapula and the pelvis are two great examples of flat bones for this use. So we've got our scapula. The next bone down is this one here. It's a long bone, and it's called the humerus. If we move down again, we've got the radius. It's this long bone. If we took the skin off this horse, it's got like a curve to it. And this is our ulna, okay? And the ulna is the site of the first mechanical lock, which is the elbow locking mechanism. The triceps brachii muscle is responsible for that. We move down again, we've got the carpus. We've got the accessory carpal bone at the back. And the knee, or the carpus, is a nice uniform joint. It's easy to learn. There are essentially two rows of three. The proximal row, we've got the radiocarpal bone on the inside, the ulnocarpal bone on the outside, and the intermediate carpal bone in the middle. The distal row essentially reflect the bones that they're sat on. So we've got the fourth on the outside, the second on the inside, and the third in the middle. And our accessory carpal bone here at the back. And then proximal phalanx, third metacarpal, proximal sesamoids, proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, distal phalanx, and the distal sesamoid. I'm sure we all know the bones of the lower limb. So if we move to the hind limb now, okay, the hind limb, or more accurately described, the pelvic limb, the most proximal bones of the pelvic limb is the pelvis. Now the pelvis starts off life as three separate bones, which is the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. They're joined together before birth and form the pelvis. So this is the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis is the one that joins essentially both sides together. And the horse is anchored on the pelvic limb in two specific places. At the top, I'm sure a joint you've all heard of is the sacroiliac joint. There's a sacroiliac joint on both sides. The sacroiliac joint is a synovial joint, although it contains very little synovial fluid. It's quite a fibrous joint. It has some serious dorsal and ventral ligaments that bind it together. Essentially, the sacrum, which is this bone here, runs through the pelvis. The last of the lumbar, the first of the sacral make the lumbar sacral, which is about here. And then you've got the sacroiliac joint either side. The second mechanical attachment is underneath the femur. At the top of the femur, there's a ball and socket joint at the head of the femur. There's a hole in the pelvis called the aceblemen, and the head of the femur goes in that. The horse's weight is centered on that femoral head when it comes to hind limb anatomy, physiology, and how things work. In walk and trot, the horse tends to swing off this ball and socket joint. Once it gets up to canter and gallop, it starts to move more off the sacroiliac joint as it's pulling them hind feet forward to get the propulsion. A horse gets very little lift off the front end. The front end pretty much just hold everything up. The hind sort of limb, the hind anatomy is where the horse gets its velocity, its propulsion, its lift from. So the magic in a horse tends to happen at the back end. And the top joint, the top bone of all this is the pelvis. If we move down, we move on to the largest long bone in any mammal's body. The horse is no different to the femur. And again, if any of you have seen a horse's skeleton, the femur is a seriously large long bone. Lots of things attached to it. At the top, there are a series of large, they're called trochanters, essentially raised, roughened areas. For example, the psoas, the ilius muscle, the gluteals, they all attach onto the femur. The psoas and the ilius are the two that allow the pelvis to tilt forward and tilt up and down. So the femur is an important bone. If we move down, we move to this little bone here called the patella. And this gives us our second mechanical lock. The hind limb has a mechanical lock, and it is the patella locking mechanism. I'm not going to go through the anatomy of the patella locking mechanism. It's quite complicated and it takes a while to do. But the horse has the ability to, essentially the quadricep muscle will pull the patella up, and then one of the ligaments will change position and it will lock. When that happens, when the horse locks this joint here, because of the reciprocal apparatus, the hock and the fetlock also become locked too. So that's the second mechanical lock that the horse has. If we move down, we've got the tibia, which is this long bone, and the fibula. Again, in us, the tibia and fibula are the same length. In the horse, it's quite a rudimentary bone now. It's attached to the tibia via a fibrous joint. And then we get to the hock. When we get to the hock, we've got the calcaneus, we've got the talus, the central tarsal bone, the third tarsal bone, the fourth tarsal bone, and then the first and second on the medial side at the back of the hock. And then again into the lower limb, metacarpals become metatarsals, but apart from that, the anatomy is the same in the hind limb, certainly in the lower limb. It's just the terminology changes from forelimb to hind limb. So yeah, that pretty much is like a basic overview of the skeleton that we're looking at. We're going to now move on and start to paint some muscles. Neil's going to talk about...
Skeleton a bit more.
Eh?
Talk about skeleton a bit more.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Right. Good morning. Thank you very much for turning up. I'm Neil Madden, FWCF, for those of you who don't know me, and I'll continue from where Paul left off. Right, here we go. 205 or 7 bones within the skeletal system. 7 in the neck, 18 in the thoracic part, 6 in the lumbar, and the sacroiliac area is another 5. All different size and shapes. Why is that? Functional anatomy. Different size. Flat bones. Flat bones are there to protect. We've got flat bones in the ribs, flat bones in the head. The cranial, that's to protect vital organs. We've got long bones for leverage, for movement. We've got short bones as part of the leverage. We've also got irregular bones. Why are they different shapes? Why are there so many? And it's to do with development or evolutionary development in response to its environment and the biomechanical demand that's placed upon it. Biomechanics is about how force affects an object static and moving. So when it stood still, the forces that are affecting it are gravity and a culmination of gravity and mass times acceleration, which is the weight of it. I'll put a demand on the bone and it will develop into the shape that it's needed to resist those forces. That's why the long bones in the front are compressed from behind and more flat, because that can resist the load that's placed upon it. And behind, if it's propulsion, then the metatarsal is round, specifically designed in response to biomechanical demand that's placed upon it. So biomechanics, some of the forces that you're going to see or experience on these legs are compression, tension, torsion. They're the main ones. And it's not surprising that when we take an x-ray of a long bone, which is there as a lever, what you see is lots of little flecks, and they're called trabecular. And trabecular actually means a beam. And a beam in mechanics has got a number of properties. It can resist compression, it can resist tension, and it can resist torsion. It's got its limits, but in those trabecular, it can resist all the biomechanical demands that's placed upon it. Functional anatomy, that's what it's all about. Okay, it's also a mineral deposit, and it's made from white metal. Manganese, magnesium, boron, all those kind of things. Very, very strong, but very, very light. And I believe that the breaking strain of it is about 12 tons per square inch, if I'm not mistaken. You'd have to look that up. So we see that there's a large number of bones, 205 or 207, in fact. Do you want to know why there's a difference between 205, 207? Yes? No? Anybody? Anybody? Any takers? I'll tell you why. Because in the knee, the carpal bones 1 and 2 are fused. Sometimes they're not. That's how you end up with 207. That's the difference of it. So all these bones are actually held in a bag. You know, when you go to the co-op and you put your stuff in a bag and it holds it all together, they're in a bag, the periosteum. The periosteum is the bone skin that covers the bone continuously through the skeletal structure from bone to bone, except where it meets a joint, then it becomes the joint capsule. So it's all held together like that, and the function of that is there to maintain and nourish the bone, which I'm not going to talk about this morning. What I am going to talk about is the levers. What we have, especially the spine. The spine is a rigid structure. It is effectively a beam. That's how we view it. And the horse uses a beam, which is resist torsion, compression, extension. And it resists that, and it uses it to advantage with gravity. And I'll explain that once we get the muscles on. But the levers by which it moves, and that's the locomotion, there are three types. There's class 1, class 2, class 3. And I'll show you what they are. Feedback. These are my props. Right, class 1 lever. You've all done this, jacking the car up, whatever. What we do is use a fulcrum point, and we take advantage of the length of the work in relation to the load. So the load's on the end of the lever, the proportion between the length of the lever to the fulcrum and from the fulcrum to the point of load is what gives you the mechanical advantage. And you've all used this one way or another. That is the most effective lever. So ask yourself, where do you use it in your everyday work? Well, these. Set of tongs, clenching tongs, anything like that. There's your lever, there's your fulcrum point, the load's at the end of them. Now, within the horse's skeletal structure, there are not many class 1 levers. It's mainly class 2 and class 3. So class 2 lever, and the effectiveness of it, is the classic wheelbarrow. Fulcrum's at the front, the load's in the middle, and the work is at the handles. Paul, could you come and stand in this, mate?
Possible.
Cheers.
Come and stand there.
In the wheelbarrow.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not intimidated.
Insurance?
Get in the wheelbarrow.
That's out my way.
Yeah. Right. 15.5 stone. Do I just go on my shoulders? Steady.
Yeah.
Right, you can see how easy that's manipulated. That is taking advantage of the distance from within the lever arm to the fulcrum in relation to where the load is. Thanks, mate. That's great.
Strong, isn't he?
Yeah. And that's very efficient. It is very efficient. So there are some class 2 levers within, quite a lot actually, class 2 levers. The third one is a class 3 lever. Now, a class 3 lever is more like a fishing rod. So the fulcrum point is at the end, and the distance between the work and the load is quite a long way. So fly fishing is an example. Moves a long way very quickly, unloaded like that. So that's a class 3 lever, and that is the less effective lever. A lot of class 3 levers in the horse. In our everyday work, yeah, Paul? Where do we use a class 3 lever? On the anvil, every day. Yeah, mate.
Thank you.
All right, just show me your hammer action. That's it. All right. We can affect a class 3 lever easily. Go on you go. Really, go give it some. Ain't going anywhere. If we make that longer, let me get hold of that. There you go. Make it longer and affect it, then we can disrupt the function, and the stress-strain relationship overloads it and it breaks. One of the most common ones that you'll see, thanks mate, is in the foot. The lever arm that we all talk about breakover from the center of the distal interphalangeal joint to the point of breakover, and how that's made up with the digital flexor tendon and the insertion. Well, the arrangement and the way that the muscle meets that through the tendinous connection, the tensile communicator, creates a class 3 lever, and it's easily overloaded. And the consequence of it, specifically for us, and that functional anatomy, is that you overload the check ligaments, suspension ligaments, and digital flexor tendon. Any questions? Just to fill this out. Yes?
Can you explain how the skeletal structure and the levers affect the hoof itself? What we're dealing with on a daily basis? So, for example, you use the third class lever there.
Yes.
Can you stick your broom handle underneath the toe and demonstrate what it does to, or a wedge or something?
Yep. So we can affect the third class lever, or the lever that we're talking about within the foot, by a reverse wedge. If we just pick the foot up, come on, put your foot down there.
David,
There we go.
have you got your
Yeah,
magic
we've got a
lever
wedge
thing
there.
here? Yeah.
So these, just while David's on getting his
It's got like a,
wedge for us. Yeah.
yeah.
So the development, this functional anatomy, has taken advantage of the arrangement of insertion and root and attachment in relation to the joints to take as much advantage as it can mechanically for energy-saving purposes. That's what it's all about. It's all about function. If you think about the environment that the horse lives in, and that it needs to save energy because it moves over 70, 80 miles a day, constantly grazing and moving about. So energy saving is paramount, and it's developed that in response to the environment that it's in. Have you got it yet?
Yeah. I'm going to get them to bring in a lever testing stuff.
Right.
And we'll do that once we've got the muscles on.
Yes, okay.
And then they can see the effect of how the third class lever works against the anatomy.
Okay, right. Right, we're ready for muscles, mate. Yeah. So, the skeleton is the base around which everything is supported. It allows for protection and it allows for movement. And for movement, what we have is the attachment of tendons and muscles. And muscles, the way in which it works is that you can't create energy. Energy is converted. So the sunlight reacts with the horse's skin, and that energy is absorbed, and the grass that it eats, and through the energy from the sunlight and the nutrients in the grass, is put into a boiling point, the stomach of the horse, I forget the name of it, the cecum, or what it's called, and it's boiled, and that energy is released. The energy, the chemical energy, is then transformed into kinetic energy, and that's how the muscles work. Now, muscles have got three specific ways in which they function. There is eccentric, isometric, and concentric. So concentric means when they contract, they shorten. And an example of that is when the horse walks and protraction takes place, the contraction of the muscle takes the leg forward. Eccentric is when the muscle contracts but actually gets longer. And that happens in the hind legs, it happens in the front legs as well, because the muscles have got all these three functions. And through propulsion, it gets longer and propels the horse forward. And then you have a third function, which is isometric, where when it functions and it contracts, it actually doesn't go anywhere. And through locomotion, through the different phases, muscles transit through all those different functions. So it doesn't just have one. And that is the conversion of chemical energy to kinetic energy. And that kinetic energy continues through movement as the horse moves forward through the anatomy, through the muscles, through the tendons, through the function of the pendulum movement of the limb. And when the foot strikes the ground, for us, that energy is converted into heat, light, and sound. So you can't create energy, you can't destroy it, it just transits. Okay, I've got it written. Yeah. Okay, so the first muscle mass that I'm going to talk about is the brachiocephalic muscle, and it attaches right to the top here. All right, mate. And it attaches to the forearm, right down here. And this is one of the muscles in the flexor chain of the limb. So that connects to the limb, and that's part of that flexor chain. Have we got some yellow, mate? Or whatever colour it is for the stay apparatus. Whatever colour you've got.
Yellow.
Yep. So this is the serratus apparatus, part of the stay apparatus, and the serratus ventralis. This is the cranial arrangement. And this is the caudal arrangement. And you can see that on the flexor side, this structure is in a position where it becomes antagonistic in relation to the function. So your serratus ventralis, cervical and cranial, these two muscle masses here work against each other in tension. So what they do is they work and they control, part of the control system for the shoulder blade. All right, so that's how that works. So the muscles on this side of the function are working in contrast and antagonistic function to this side. All right. Yeah. No, I don't like it. Another colour. Yeah. Okay. So in contrast to the flexor side, at the extension side, the flexor side, we've got the triceps. And they're known because they've got 3 heads. In this position here. Another colour. Okay. Attached to the scapula is the supraspinatus muscle on this side. Right the way down to the point of shoulder. You got another colour there, mate? Thanks. Cheers. Yep. And then there's a short attachment from the biceps brachii to the top of the forearm. Well, we got some yellow. Cheers. Followed by the carpi radialis. And you'll notice that there is a continuous connection from the muscle of the scapula right the way through from the brachial muscle here down to the extensor carpi radialis, which is part of this extensor chain, along with the serratus ventralis, cervical aspect, working in an antagonistic aspect with the flexor side, the triceps, and the serratus cervical aspect. Another colour, any colour will do.
New colour?
Yeah. All right.
Got it?
Yeah. So, just situated here is the latissimus dorsi, which again is part of the flexor chain, but this attaches right the way along the spine and attaches the front end to the back end. And this is part of the spine flexion function. A bit red. So you can see how the muscle mass is starting to build up. And again, this is functional anatomy, and it's to do with the extension and flexion of the limb being a pendulum, moving backwards and forwards, and it needs to move on a straight line. Any deviation from that straight line due to conformation or anatomical abnormalities, it means that the horse loses energy, costs more energy, which is not, for the environment they live in, it can cause a real problem. Another controller of the flexor side is the descender muscles of the pectoral, of the pecs, which is situated down here. And just to keep this in context, the other side of it is here. Here's the pectoral muscles on the front side. What you'll start to see is that there are 4 areas that control the movement of the scapula. Some green? Okay. Yeah. The extensors for the spine are the abdominal muscles that again are starting to make up what we can see is a ring of muscle that goes around the horse. So the spine, flexor, extensor. Extensor muscles of the forelimb, flexor muscles of the forelimb. All right. Some more flexors in the ulnaris muscle, which attacks to the ulna, and the muscles that are responsible for the flexion of the limb, deep digital flexor, superficial digital flexor, are situated up here. Yeah, blue. These are our flexor muscles. So we've got the deep digital flexors, which passes down the inside. And the insertion is on the semilunar crescent of P3. Some yellow. So the deep digital flexor tendon attachment, which creates that class 3 lever, accompanying that from is the superficial digital flexor tendon, passes down the outside and attaches proximally and to P2 down the bottom there, and that flexes the proximal fetlock joint, pastern joint. So the flexor side of the limb flexes the limb. Now, Paul already mentioned that the reason that this isn't attached with a collarbone is so that it can pick its leg up. Well, there's a reason for that. Another energy-saving device, when you're walking, you have what's called inertia, resistance to movement. If you walk with your legs straight, it's very difficult. Same for the horse. So what it does is it flexes the limb. That flexion of the limb reduces the distance of the end of the foot with a point of rotation, and that reduces the amount of resistance, inertia there is for the protraction and retraction of the limb. Again, saving energy, functional anatomy, all being designed. Big long legs, picks it up, reduces the amount of inertia and saves energy as the horse continues to move. We've got some of that purple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cheers. In the forearm are the extensor muscles. Lateral extensor tendon originates from the muscle of the same name. And if you run your finger down it, you can feel it. It's there, look. It runs lateral of the leg, right the way down. Attaches just above the fetlock. Runs forward and becomes part of the deep digital, as the common digital extensor tendon at the front of the leg. Get some red. And the common extensor tendon from the muscle. Big wide fibrous band communicates a lot of energy. A tendon is a tensile communicator. Unlike a muscle, it works in tension, so it's designed to resist tension. And it has a stress-strain capability and can be overloaded. And the way that they're overloaded is that it's called impulse. So the amount of energy that the structure is exposed to over time. Lame horses, for example, on the lame leg, to reduce the amount of load on it, what it does is it puts the foot on the ground and it keeps the foot, and it loads the foot longer, believe it or not. Loads the foot longer, which reduces the amount of force that goes through there. An example of a short impulse is using your hammer on the anvil and hitting metal. That small amount of time with a large amount of force over a small area, that increases shock loading, and that's how you can overload the stress-strain capabilities of the structures, bones, tendons, ligaments, tendinous attachments, ligamentous attachments. Can I have some blue, mate? Thanks. Another muscle that not often mentioned, but the omotransverse muscle, which is situated, which again is a part of the extensor apparatus of the forelimb. Can I get some red again?
Yeah.
Situated down here. So, and that's the brachiocephalic muscle. Just give that a bit more definition. And the reason that I've highlighted these is because they're attached to the head, is because the head is actually a counterbalance. And the horse uses gravity to help it move. In the front end, this counterbalance moves up and down. And as the horse starts to walk, you'll see that it'll lift it up and it'll pull it down, which will action or actuate the omotransverse and the brachiocephalic muscle, which is attached to the forearm, and that will start to bring the forearm forward. So in using gravity, it'll conserve energy and it'll help it move. All right, it's the back end. Oh, look at this, back end, right. I just put that's the supraspinatus, this is the infraspinatus muscle on the shoulder blade, which is part of the flexor chain. You can see how we've got the latissimus dorsi and we've got the abdominal muscles, which are starting to connect the front to the back. And I told you that the spine is rigid, and it is really, really rigid. And it acts as a beam, and it's attached by the hip joints on both sides. And this ring of muscle that we're starting to draw in allows the horse to lift the front end of the horse up and propel it forward, just like the head during locomotion. At the walk and at the trot, that their back acts like a beam being pushed forward and supported on pairs or singles or pairs of legs, 3 legs, 2 legs, depending on the gait, until you get to trot. When you get to trot and canter, what happens is that the beam of the back is effectively lifted up. And the energy that is used in lifting the spine up is then capitalized on by allowing gravity to take over and propel the horse forward. Another functional aspect. Through this ring of muscle, it allows it to save that energy by using gravity for locomotory advantage. Okay. We talked about locking mechanism. There's a locker mechanism in the front leg, which is part of the olecranon process and the elbow joint. It's a joint that's either open or it's closed. In the hind limb, we know about the patella. So the first thing we're going to just put in is tensor fascia lata, which is a big fascia which attaches to the top of the patella. Get some yellow, mate. Yeah. And the quadriceps femoris, which is situated here, are also part of this locking mechanism. And this is the powerhouse. We've got some blue. Is that blue? Yeah, that is. And one of the most intriguing muscles and important ones, I think, is the iliopsoas. The iliopsoas is attached to the spine, and you know when you get this low-grade back pain and low-grade hock pain because of incorrect posture, it's this attachment of the iliopsoas muscle which attaches to the spine and to the femur is the main propulsion of the hind leg. Okay. With some green. So flexor side of the limb, and around here is the biceps femoris, believe it or not, which is a large muscle mass, and this is where all the energy comes from. And this is a class 3 lever. And then behind that, there's the semi-tendinous and semi-membranous gluteal muscles. And this, by the way, is the tail. And this is where the powerhouse of the horse is. Got a bit more green. Some of the function of the hind leg doesn't just extend and protract, doesn't just go backwards and forwards. It's got a bit of an odd movement where it comes out and can move around because of the attachment of the joint, which is a ball joint up here. So the locking mechanism functions very simply. The patella has got 3 ligaments on it. It's got an outside one, a middle one, and an inside one, lateral, medial, and the inside one. And on the femur, there is a hook, a trochanter, and the tensor fascial arter and the quadriceps femoris, what they do is they lift the patella up, and the biceps femoris pull the patella out. And what it does is there's the hook, it lifts the ligament off it and pull it to one side. And to lock it, they put it back over again. It does it voluntary. It can do it, it can make it do it, or it can do it autonomously. And some of the problems you get with it, especially in Highlands, that's the one they get this patella locking problem. And that means that it doesn't function properly and the leg gets stuck. And because the leg gets stuck, the reciprocal apparatus means that it can't flex its leg. Yeah. And that purple colour. Yeah. Cheers. So, the reciprocal apparatus is made up of 2 fibrous bands, peroneus tertius, which is down here. Now, it depends on who teaches you and which books you read, which is the more important. And I was taught that the peroneus tertius has got more control than the gastrocnemius. One thing I do know is that if this particular structure, peroneus tertius, gets ruptured, you can actually flex the hock without flexing the stifle. It's quite odd. Yeah, I'll do. Yeah. Because of the arrangement of attach and root and insertion of those 2 structures around the joint, it means that you can't flex one joint, the hock, without flexing the stifle. We then start to get the flexor tendons. Oh yeah, blue. So the muscle for the flexor is in here, and the flexor tendon in the hind limb passes the attachment to the tendon passes over the inside of the hock over what's a groove which is called a sustentaculum. So the tendon passes down here, and it's this area, if you get irritation to the tendon sheath and it swells up, you get therapin. It's in that area there, and it passes through, passes down. Right the way down, the same in the front leg, all the way down, and attachment to P3. Great, superficial. Yeah. Muscle for the superficial flexor tendon is in here, and what happens is that at this point, the superficial and the peroneus, the gastrocnemius, actually twist and turn over. So one sits on top of the other. So you've got an attachment at the top of the calcaneus process, and superficial digital flexor tendon again passes down the back of the leg, produces a ring at this point, and attaches to the top of P2 and the bottom of P2, like that. Okay, you'll see that I've purposely left out the suspensory ligaments. Okay, yellow. Right, now, the suspensory ligament is the largest ligament in the body, and it attaches in the front leg just below, or its origin is just below the carpus, and it passes down front of the leg, attaches to the top of the sesamoids, it bifurcates, and then it passes over the fetlock, which itself is a mechanical arrangement, and it passes forward and attaches to the pyramidal process. So it crosses the midline of the leg, looking from this side. So at this side, its function is flexion. And as it crosses, then it is in the range of the extension side of the leg, and it has an antagonistic arrangement at that point. Now, one of the things about the muscular structure of the horse and the arrangement is that we're all led to believe that the horse's weight is supported through the biomechanical arrangement of the lamina within the foot, and that the load is suspended within the foot. Well, that isn't always the case. Okay? The arrangement of the tendons and ligament and the arrangement of the fetlock, a lot of the load is supported and dissipated through the suspension of those structures, both in the front and in the hind. The extensor tendon in front, from the muscle mass, there's no lateral extension in the front, to the top of the pyramidal process of Pre3. So we have the flexion and the extension muscles of the hind leg connected via a ring of muscle, latissimus dorsi, and abdominal muscles, which allows a ring of muscle for the horse to take advantage of the fact that the spine's rigid, and you've got this mechanical arrangement of attachment of the hind legs to the spine through a ball joint, and the front leg suspended in what is a sling. Just want to have a look at that, see if I'm missing anything. I don't think I have. No?
Yeah. There's only tibialis cranialis, but it's not even that important.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Right. Yes?
So, 9 times out of 10, if I'm shoeing a horse in front and it's good to shoe in front, and I get to shoe it behind and try to take its leg behind it, it doesn't like any amount of banging on its things or whatever, but it's fine to bring it forwards onto a foot stand. If I go onto its spine, just behind the saddle, and move over my finger inside of the spine, get a lot of sensitivity in that region.
Just there.
9 times, yeah.
Just there. Attachment of the iliopsoas muscle. That's the attachment of the iliopsoas muscle. And plus you also get muscle fatigue in there. If the horse is camped under and it's supporting its load on itself, this is the area that's going to get stress. Yeah, because you've got to bear in mind that this is some of the superficial and deep muscle that we've highlighted for the function, but there's lots more. There's a lot more in there than just these. These are the ones that concern us as functional anatomy as farriers. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Okay.
I would
right.
say as well, can I just say, as farriers, our psoas muscle is one that we suffer with. Because we move on one plane, essentially that way. As you get older, you start to do gardening and you start to twist and suddenly your back goes. Because your psoas becomes locked on. And there's an exercise to do, which is a psoas release, that will release the psoas because it gets cramped. And I think horses, you got the lumbar sacral, you got the sacroiliac joints. There's a lot goes on in that area. And I agree with you totally. Everything that you just said is right. Most horses are like that.
Yeah. Okay.
But you're getting into the deeper and deeper muscle groups.
So, in terms of the leg position, taking it behind it, why it's comfortable to go forward, because of that chain pulling in that region.
Yeah, because of that chain, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all to do with the function of the muscle and its capability. If it's damaged or it's overloaded, then it protects itself by going hard. You know, when you're stiff, it does the same thing. So consequently, muscle function, eccentric, concentric, and the isometric, it goes through that function. If it's painful to protect it, it's isometric, it's not going anywhere. You know, and it's the whole part of that mechanism. All right.
And the neurological system as well, if one muscle's breaking or is under strain, another one will get switched on. The body will do it automatically. Sometimes you get locked on, and that's when you get this pain and again, we as farriers suffer all the time with it.
Yeah.
Muscles get locked on to protect another muscle, and your neurological system deals with all of that side of it. A good sports therapist can isolate the muscle and switch it back off again and make it do its load as it should do.
Okay. Right. So one thing I will say to you about functional anatomy, these are individual biomechanical structures that work antagonistically with other structures within the body. But overall, it is a biomechanical unit, one unit. And the way that, for us, the load, the weight, which is through the center of mass, is affected by two things. Well, one thing mainly, gravity. Gravity affects all of us. Everything's got gravitational potential, and to prove that, if I release this object, it will fall directly to the center of the earth. That's the potential. Everybody's got it. That's why humans are frightened of heights, because if you fall off a cliff, your gravitational potential can kill you, apparently. Yeah, you only get one go. So, for gravity is an indirect force which is affecting everything, all the things, all the time. I can't emphasize that enough, as you can see. Excited about it. So the other thing we've got direct force, which is the attachments of all of these. Now remember I said that the skeleton's in a bag, and the periosteum's continuous to bone, and then at the bone you get a joint. Well, that's protected by ligaments. So the ligamentous structures which hold all these things together makes it one unit. And the load that's passed from the horse's body onto the structures of the scapula, or the sling in the front end, it passes down the center of the bone. Now, remarkably, the way that it's developed is that the arrangement of tendons and ligaments and muscles at each joint makes sure that the force, the vector force, carries down the center of the bone. So what is a vector? So everything has got, or movement's got two components. It's got a forward movement and a downward moment. That's how it's viewed. So propulsion and gravity, we'll review that. So this object, if I am to impart a force to it, now the force is proportionate to how fast it's going to move, so that's the first thing that we're going to come across, is that it's going to take a path because it's going to be affected by the forces that are placed upon it. So gravity. So one force is pushing it, the other force is gravity, and you can see that trajectory, that's called a vector force. That's the culmination of the forward and downward movement. So the culmination of forward and downward movement and the arrangement of ligaments, tendons, and muscles within the leg direct that force down the center of the bone, right the way down the center of the bone, and there's a clue there. So as it comes down and it meets the fetlock, it's transmitted forward, and the direct contact from bone to bones means that the line of force comes out through the center of the distal interphalangeal joint, center of rotation. Now, the combination of the direct force, that's bone-to-bone contact, and the vector force of gravity means that you get this line of force that passes down the limb, and the culmination of those two end up at the point of pressure. Does that say anything to you? Point of pressure, center of rotation. And when we're looking at foot mapping and foot dressing, that's how it affects us. It's all coming from here, and it's all coming through the skeletal structure. Conformation is a key part of that. And understanding how the suspensory ligament actually holds that load up and that it doesn't all meet the foot is an important part of it. Not only in the front limb, but in the hind limb. Yep. Has anybody got anything they want to say or any questions? Yep. Yeah. I've no idea. I'm a farrier. Yeah.
We'll be able to answer that. Yeah, because I've got the same. Yeah. One of the things to say there, all of this muscular arrangement, okay, the muscles aren't just loose in there, they're held together by this fascia that joins one set of muscles to another. Okay, so if conformation variations or load variations through pathologies change, then the interaction between the musculature via this fascia changes and you get constrictions in muscles. So in the example that you're looking at, with neck issues and TMJ and stuff like that, then you end up overloading another structure which happens to be the load-bearing structure, the foot. So you can often get gross morphological changes and or what appears to be foot lameness, but it's actually related to musculoskeletal stuff in the neck or the pole or the back. That's the exciting cause, if we like. So that's why it's kind of important once
you want to do the walking? Do you want to do the walk at all?
And you'll see on one of the cases that we're going to present to you, that once you've done what you can with the foot, that the relationship between physios and osteopaths and other paraprofessionals is important to keep that loading as central as possible. Because otherwise, you know, those structures free of obstruction, because otherwise the loading is what they call off-axis, and because the foot has certain mechanical properties that allow it to expand and contract and distort in shape, the period of time that a structure is overloaded, so say over a shoeing cycle, is also a big factor, because it's designed to be able to take all that, but within a specific time frame at a specific gait. Yeah, so once you increase that time, in other words, the magnitude plus the duration are what gives you this hoof morphology. Does that make sense to you? But I'm no doubt that Genevieve will explain that a little bit better than I can. Yes, please, yeah, definitely.
You're saying you've got like tension through the TMJ. Actually, this horse went to Newmarket because when I went to Anfield to put the head collar on it, it used to bugger off. Anyway, so I went to Newmarket and they said, oh, couldn't find anything, found loads else wrong with it. There was nothing wrong with his head. Cut a long story short, we ended up at Leahurst and I said, I want the horse's head scanned because I thought he'd got a tumour or something because he was really, he was just sensitive. Let me ride him, but it's just when I went to put the head collar on. So we went there, scanned the head with the MRI, and don't ask me what it's called because it's in the house, but he's either had trauma or an infection, and in the TMJ here, it had ossified, caused inflammation, and he'd basically got earache. Okay? So they actually performed quite a, I think the vet had only done it twice before. They opened him up under here, and they took, they made a bit of a hole here, took an 8 centimetre bone out here, which relieved the pressure here. Okay, but you wouldn't have known that unless he'd have had your head scanned. I thought he'd got a tumour. I knew there was something wrong, but I couldn't put my... Well, he went to bloody Newmarket. Yeah. But it took him about 6 months to actually recover from because he clearly had this pain for a while, and it was either from a trauma to the head, which had instigated that, or an infection. That's what the vet said.
Could you walk it down here, please? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, down the bottom. All right, we're going to walk the horse past. First thing I want you, if you just stand still, first thing I want you to notice is that the use of gravity as the horse starts is watch its head. This is a bit of a light bulb moment when you watch this. All these structures are representative of what's underneath, and observe how it moves, okay? Yeah, see the head movement, extension, flexion and contraction. Compare unpainted with painted. Notice the patellar area, the biceps femoris and the quadriceps, how it all functions with the pendulum movement. Remember, this is at the walk. So the flexion and the lifting the leg up, which reduces inertia, isn't that evident, but you can see that this is the response to the demand that's placed upon it. When it's in a faster gait and it's moving faster, then it's more animated and exaggerated. Yep, please. Okay, mate. It highlights that movement because it's painted. I mean, you look at the other side, you don't observe it as much. What this is doing is highlighting the muscle function that's underneath. So it's bringing it out, and it shows you. If you watch the area of the iliopsoas and you see how that moves, and then you can see the rest of it, it looks like that it's doing that, yeah. Does what it says on the tin. If you take particular notice of the area of the scapular muscles, the bicep, the brachiomuscles, and the extensor carpi radialis, you'll see the function of the movement of the shoulder blade, how it locks the knee out. And the triceps at the back of it working antagonistically, stressing and supporting the limb through tension. So it's tension and contraction and extension of the muscle functions at different phases that allows the fluid movement of gait. And this is at the walk. So as it gets faster and faster, this changes. And it's all about the amount of air that a horse takes in. So the faster it goes, its metabolism that burns and makes the chemical energy gets used up. So to conserve that energy, what it does is it changes gait. So if it's walking, it's getting a bit too fast and it's starting to, because it's using too much oxygen, it'll change gait to a trot, and it'll speed up, and then it'll slow down into an average gait, and that'll be consistent with the amount of oxygen it's using. So you take it, you're pushing it along and it's getting faster, and the more energy that it's using and the more oxygen it's using, it'll need to go into the next gait. So it then gets into a trot and then a canter, and it has its limitations of what it can do. Now, if you think about some of these dressage gaits that they use where it's running on the spot, Yeah, it's running on the spot and it gets out of breath really quickly because it uses all its energy. I thank you all.